The doors of the Grand Hyatt Seoul swung open like the parting of the sea, and the entire lobby held its breath. He walked in the way powerful men always did, not fast, not slow, but with the kind of deliberate stillness that made rooms rearrange themselves around him. Kang Joon-ho, 42 years old, chairman of Kang Industries, and the quiet, unelected sovereign of half the underground economy in South Korea. His black suit fit him the way armor fits a soldier, not decoratively but functionally. The material was expensive enough that it absorbed light rather than reflecting it. Behind him, 4 men in earpieces fanned out in a practiced formation, each of them scanning in a different direction with the efficiency of a system rather than 4 separate people. 2 more flanked the entrance. The hotel staff smiled wider and moved faster and pretended not to notice the way their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. Guests at the business summit murmured into their glasses. A cluster of executives from a Japanese pharmaceutical firm stepped back slightly to widen the path, the movement collective and unconscious, like fish adjusting to a current. A government official, the kind with a full security detail of his own, nodded his head in a way that bordered on bowing. An aide near the elevator bay turned to whisper something to her colleague and then thought better of it and went quiet. Nobody looked directly at Kang Joon-ho. That was the rule. Not spoken, not written down anywhere. Just understood the way the most important rules always are, carried in the body, practiced by reflex, obeyed without requiring thought. Across the lobby, near the concierge desk, Dr. Amara Osei looked up from the event itinerary in her hands and felt the world stop rotating. She didn't gasp. She was too well trained for that. 7 years of discipline, of teaching herself to breathe through catastrophe, of learning to hold her face completely still even when everything inside her was screaming. All of it kicked in at once, instantly, the way real training does. Her fingers tightened around the paper until it crinkled at the edge. Her heels went still on the marble floor. And she stood there, just stood there, while her brain sent one frantic message to her legs. Run. Her legs didn't listen, because beside her, tugging at the hem of her blazer with the casual impatience of a child who has never once felt the weight of danger in his life, was her 6-year-old son. Mom, Kofi said, craning his neck toward the commotion near the entrance. Why did everyone get quiet? Kofi. Her voice came out low and controlled, scraped clean of everything. Don't look over there. Look at me. But Kofi Osei had his father's eyes. Dark, intense, missing absolutely nothing. And those eyes had already found the thing she was trying to redirect him away from. He went very still in the way children do when they sense something enormous without understanding what it is. A particular quality of attention settled over him. Then he looked up at her. Then back across the lobby. Then up at her again, this time with the careful focus of a child assembling a puzzle. Mom, he said slowly, is that the man from the picture you keep hidden? The itinerary crumpled completely in her fist. The distance between them and Kang Joon-ho was maybe 40 feet of polished marble and ambient piano music and a world that had just cracked down the middle. One of his security detail was already scanning the room. A habit, a reflex, and in 3 seconds, maybe 4, those eyes were going to land on her, and then everything she had carefully, painfully constructed over 7 years would come apart in the lobby of a 5-star hotel, in front of her son, in a city she had made herself believe she was safe enough to return to. Kofi was already moving. Kofi, she whispered, came out strangled, barely audible. He walked across the lobby with the unshakable confidence of a child who has never been taught that the world is supposed to be scary. His little dress shoes clicked against the marble with an almost rhythmic purpose. He dodged around a luggage cart without breaking stride. He navigated around a hotel staff member who was pushing a cart of flowers. He walked directly and without hesitation toward the wall of men in black suits like a 6-year-old aimed at a target. Excuse me, he said to the nearest guard, using the polite address Amara had drilled into him for situations involving adults he didn't know. Clear, respectful, completely unafraid. The guard blinked down at him, startled in a way that was visible even through the professional neutrality. He put a hand out to redirect the boy away. Young man, this area is restricted. I need to ask that man something, Kofi said simply, pointing past the guard at Kang Joon-ho himself, with the comfortable directness of a child who sees no reason that straightforward requests shouldn't be granted. Amara was moving now, navigating through the lobby with her heart hammering against her sternum, excusing herself past other guests, calculating the distance, knowing she was too far, too slow, and Kofi was already past the first guard because the guard had hesitated. You did not physically redirect a child in the lobby of the Grand Hyatt, and the second guard hadn't moved yet because nobody had done a threat assessment for a small boy in a blue polo shirt, and the gap had opened and Kofi walked through it. Kang Joon-ho heard the commotion in his peripheral awareness before he registered the source. He was a man who had survived enough to pay attention to small disruptions. He turned, and Kofi looked up at him, completely unafraid, with those dark and precise eyes that contained exactly the kind of focused, assessing intelligence that looked back at Kang Joon-ho from every mirror he had ever stood in front of, and asked in the clearest and most carrying voice in the lobby, Why do you keep looking at my mom like you know her? The piano music seemed to go distant. The murmurs stopped. 3 of Junho's guards stepped in simultaneously, and he stopped all of them with 2 words in a tone that didn't require volume. He looked down at the boy, and went very, very still, because the child's face was painfully, impossibly, undeniably familiar. The jaw, the angle of the cheekbones, the set of the eyes, not just their color but the particular quality of attention in them, the way they looked at things with a focused intelligence that didn't apologize for itself. The way the boy held himself, even now, with this particular stillness that he probably didn't know was unusual. That stillness that every person who had ever met Kang Junho remembered. He knew that stillness. He had lived inside it for 42 years. He had watched it in mirrors. He had never before seen it looking back at him from the outside. He crouched slowly, bringing himself to the boy's level in a movement that made his security detail shift with visible uncertainty, because they had never once in their professional lives seen him do anything like it. His eyes were level with the child's now. He looked at him carefully, unhurriedly, the way he looked at contracts and at problems and at people who were about to tell him something important. "What is your name?" Kang Junho asked quietly. "Kofi," the boy said, without hesitation and without looking away. "What's yours?" Behind the boy, Amara finally reached them. She put both hands on Kofi's shoulders and straightened, and when Kang Junho rose to his full height and their eyes met for the first time in 7 years, she felt the ground shift so completely beneath her feet that it was a miracle she was still standing. He looked exactly the same. That was the cruelest part of it, she would think later. 7 years and he looked exactly the same. A little harder around the eyes perhaps. A new scar along his jaw she didn't recognize. A few lines that hadn't been there before. But fundamentally, irrecoverably, unmistakably the same man she had loved in a small apartment in a city she'd fled 7 years ago and hadn't stopped loving even when she'd made herself stop looking. He said nothing for a long moment. Just looked at her. Then at the boy. Then at her again. With an expression that she couldn't fully read but that contained, somewhere beneath the control, something raw and enormous. When he finally spoke, his voice was perfectly quiet. Quiet the way rooms are quiet when everyone in them has stopped breathing. "Is he mine?" 7 years earlier, Amara Osei had arrived in Seoul with 2 suitcases, a scholarship letter, a medical school acceptance, and absolutely no backup plan. She was 24 years old, the daughter of a Ghanaian-American nurse practitioner and a high school biology teacher from a suburb of Atlanta where ambition was treated like a character trait rather than an accident of circumstance. She had grown up in a house where dinner conversations covered everything from the mechanics of her mother's toughest cases to her father's opinions about the scientific method and the particular frustration of teaching it to teenagers who believed evolution was optional. She had been raised on the belief, stated explicitly, demonstrated constantly, that intelligence was a responsibility and that no door was locked to a person willing to study hard enough to find the handle. She had graduated summa cum laude from Emory at 23. She had applied for the Seoul National University scholarship 3 times, the first 2 rejected on technicalities she addressed systematically in each subsequent application. She had won it on the 3rd try with a personal statement her mentor called, "the most precise articulation of scientific purpose I have read from someone your age." She had packed her 2 suitcases alone at midnight the night before her flight because her parents had wanted to help and she had needed, deeply and privately, to do it herself. That was not stubbornness. That was self-knowledge. She understood that she was the kind of person who needed to feel the full weight of a choice in order to trust herself to carry it. Seoul met her with a gray sky and cold air and the smell of street food from the vendors near the university, and she stood on the sidewalk with her 2 suitcases and thought, "I can do this." She did. She studied with the focused intensity of someone for whom failure was not a dramatic event to fear but simply a data point to correct for. She learned Korean, first from a textbook, then from a language app, then most usefully from the Halmiani who ran the convenience store near her apartment building, who made Amara practice her pronunciation every morning when she came in for instant ramen and who corrected her with the unsentimental efficiency of a woman who had no time for getting things wrong. She worked night shifts at a 24-hour clinic handling administrative intake because her scholarship covered tuition but not textbooks and not food and not the specific expensive loneliness of being far from home. She slept 6 hours when she could get them and considered that adequate. She made exactly 2 friends in the first year. Ji-young, a pathology student in her building who occasionally appeared at her door with homemade kimbap and stayed for 2 hours of conversation before disappearing back into her own schedule, and Marcus, a Nigerian-American English teacher from Houston who ran a small expat dinner every other Sunday and had once found Amara asleep on his couch at 8 in the evening and simply put a blanket over her and let her sleep. It was a small life, but it was hers entirely and in every detail, and she was proud of it in the way you can only be proud of something you built from materials no one handed you. The night everything changed. She was walking home from her clinic shift at 2 in the morning, cutting through the narrow lane behind her apartment building because it was faster, and she had a pharmacology exam in 5 hours, and she needed every minute she could find. She almost stepped on him. He was in the shadows between 2 streetlights, on the ground against the base of the wall, and at first she thought he was drunk. She slowed down, looked closer. The position was wrong for drunk. Not sprawled, but deliberately low, conserving himself. And then she saw the blood, dark and spreading through what had been, at some recent point, an extremely expensive shirt. Every carefully cultivated instinct she had told her to back away and call 119 from the corner and let the professionals handle it. You did not help strangers in alleys in unfamiliar cities at 2 in the morning. You especially did not help strangers who were bleeding in ways that suggested the bleeding had not been accidental. She knelt down anyway. She was a medical student. She couldn't not. Hey, she said in Korean, pressing 2 fingers to his throat, finding the pulse. Fast and a little unsteady, but present and strong. Can you hear me? Can you open your eyes? His eyes opened. Black and direct and even half-conscious, carrying a weight she didn't have the context to name yet. He looked at her with the focused intensity of a man cataloging a potential threat, and then something shifted in his expression. A nearly invisible adjustment, as he registered what she was. You're not, he started, and then seemed to think better of finishing that sentence. Don't talk yet, she said. She was already running her hands along the damage with clinical efficiency, assessing. 2 wounds, both in the torso. Serious but not immediately fatal if she moved quickly and correctly. Her clinic bag was over her shoulder. She was already thinking through what she had and what she needed. Can you walk if I help you? He said yes. It wasn't entirely true, but they made it work, Amara taking more of his weight than either of them acknowledged. Moving through the back entrance of her building and up 4 flights of stairs, because she wasn't putting a bleeding stranger who might be dying into an elevator where anyone could see them. She got him onto her couch and worked on him for 90 minutes with her textbooks shoved to the end of the table to make room and her hands moving with the quiet efficiency she was training herself toward. The focus that blocks out everything unnecessary and keeps only what matters. He didn't make a sound through any of it. That was the first thing she really noticed, about him as a person rather than as a patient. He was the quietest human being she had ever treated. Not tense with suppressed pain, but genuinely, composedly still. He watched her hands with those dark eyes and he kept his breathing even and he said nothing. Most people, even stoic people, made some sound when you were cleaning and closing wounds without adequate anesthetic. This man simply didn't. These aren't from a mugging, she said at one point, not looking up. Her voice was clinical. Just observation. The angle is wrong. Muggers go for the outside. Someone who knows what they're doing aims here. She paused, repositioning. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. He didn't respond. I'm not calling the police, she said. She looked up then directly at him. That's not my business. But I need to know if whoever did this is going to come through that door tonight. A beat of silence. Then, no. They think I'm dead. His Korean was standard Seoul dialect, clean and precise, the Korean of someone educated rather than someone performing education. His voice was low in a way that felt less like natural register and more like a decision, like a man who had determined, somewhere along the way, that he would never need to raise his voice to be heard. Okay, she said, and went back to work. His name, she learned over the following 3 days, was June. Just June, he said, which she understood even then was not the complete truth but was the truth he was choosing to extend, and she decided to treat it with the same respect she wanted him to extend toward the things she wasn't volunteering either. He couldn't leave for 3 days. The wounds were serious enough that moving too early would reopen them, and she told him so in the level, certain voice she was practicing for the examining rooms she would eventually inhabit, the voice that communicates information without leaving room for negotiation. He looked at her for a long moment when she said it, and she could see in his expression that he wasn't accustomed to being told things in voices that didn't leave room for negotiation. Not with anger, not with defiance. Just the quiet observation of a man for whom being managed was unusual. He stayed. He called people brief, terse, authoritative calls she gave him privacy for by retreating to her small bedroom with her pharmacology notes. The apartment was not large enough for real privacy, so she simply decided not to listen. She went to her exam and came back. She worked her clinic shift and came back. She left food on the kitchen counter, simple things whatever she'd made for herself, and told him where everything was and mostly left him to the stillness he seemed to prefer. She gave him 2 of her medical textbooks in case he needed something to occupy his mind, which was an odd offer to make a stranger, but it was genuinely the only entertainment she owned. The second evening, she came home to find him awake and sitting up against the arm of the couch, one of the textbooks open and propped on his knees. He had read 140 pages. She stopped in the doorway, coat still on. You actually read it? You have annotations in the margins, he said, looking up. You argue with the author in chapter 7. She shrugged out of her coat and hung it up. The author is wrong about 3 separate things in chapter 7. I know, he said. Your notes made the case clearly. You were right on all 3 counts. She laughed before she could decide not to. A short, surprised laugh, the kind that escapes before permission is granted. And across the small apartment, something happened on his face that wasn't quite a smile but was the shape of one. The ghost of an expression that had perhaps once been more accessible than it was now. She made dinner. He helped, moving with deliberate care around his injury, and she noticed that he didn't ask what to do or wait to be assigned tasks. He simply watched for a few seconds, identified the parts he could manage without complicating things, and did them. They ate at her small kitchen table across from each other, and she asked him what he thought about Chapter 7, and he told her, and she pushed back, and he pushed back harder, and somewhere in the third hour of that conversation, she looked up from her empty bowl and realized that neither of them had noticed the time passing. She thought about it later, in a different city, in a different life, and she could point to that evening as the precise moment the ground shifted. Not because anything dramatic happened. Because nothing dramatic happened. Because it was the most ordinary evening she'd had since arriving in Seoul. Two people eating a simple meal and arguing about ideas and neither of them performing anything. And it felt, in the way things feel when they are true, like something she hadn't known she was hungry for. On the third night, she came home and he was on the phone. The voice he used was completely different from the voice he used with her. Clipped, cold, carrying the kind of authority that doesn't announce itself but is simply, unmistakably present. She heard him say two words in a tone that made the back of her neck prickle before she caught herself and moved to the kitchen to give him space. He ended the call and turned and saw her face. "Sit down," he said. And then, after a pause that seemed to cost him something measurable, "There are things you should know about me. Before I go." She sat down at the kitchen table. He sat across from her, the way they had sat 3 days in a row now, but this time the thing between them was different, heavier, more deliberate. And Kang Junho, his full name, his real name, all of it, said evenly and without apology, told her what he was. Not everything. She understood that then and she understood it now. But enough. He told her about Kang Industries, what it was on paper and what it was beneath the paper. He told her about his father, who had built the criminal infrastructure that Junho had inherited at 17 when his father went to prison and left a 17-year-old boy as the only person with enough knowledge of the organization to keep it from destroying itself. He told her, in the careful, level voice of a man who had made a reckoning with himself long ago, that he had not chosen what he was, but that he had chosen, every day since, to be it with a certain set of rules that were his own and that he enforced absolutely. He told her that people feared him, that most of what they feared was earned. She sat with that. She was quiet for a long time. "Why are you telling me?" she asked finally. "Because you helped me without knowing," he said. "And you deserve to be able to choose, with complete information, whether you want me to go quietly or whether there's something else here worth acknowledging." She looked at him across the table, this careful, complicated, deeply controlled man who had read 140 pages of her pharmacology textbook and argued with her about Chapter 7 with the focus of someone who genuinely cared about being right, and she thought about what it said about a person that his first instinct, given a clean opportunity for comfortable silence, had been to tell the truth. "You can stay until you're healed enough," she said. That was always the agreement. He left on the 5th day. Early morning, gray and cool, the city quiet at that hour in the way that feels like borrowed time. She walked him down the back stairs, the same way they'd come up, and at the bottom, in the gray early light, he turned and looked at her with an expression she didn't have a full vocabulary for yet. Complex and careful and containing something that hadn't quite decided whether to exist. "I'd like to see you again," he said. "That's probably not a sensible idea," she said. "No," he agreed. "It almost certainly isn't." She gave him her number anyway. What followed was 3 months that Amara would spend the next 7 years trying to either fully forget or fully understand, never quite managing either. He was not, she discovered, a man who did anything by half measures. When he called with a purpose. When he appeared, always careful, always quiet. His security detail always instructed to hang back at a distance that made them look like coincidence. He was fully present in a way she hadn't encountered before in anyone with his kind of schedule and responsibility. He didn't check his phone while she was talking. He didn't let his attention slide sideways to the next thing. He looked at her when she spoke and he remembered everything, and when she made a point he disagreed with, he said so directly and specifically, and when she made a point that changed his mind, he admitted it without the particular pained hesitation she had observed in other men who weren't accustomed to adjusting their positions. He took her to places in Seoul she never would have found in a guidebook. Not the expensive restaurants or the tourist landmarks, but the specific, hidden places that required knowing someone. A basement record shop in Mapogu run by an elderly man who'd been collecting since the 1970s, and who played whatever he felt like regardless of whether anyone wanted to hear it. A rooftop restaurant in Yongsan that had no signage and no digital presence and served only one dish per day and was perpetually, improbably full. A particular bench in Bukshanhanek village where the city spread out below in the late afternoon light in a way that made everything feel, for a few minutes, like it could be navigated. She took him to her world in exchange, which was smaller and more honest. Her cramped apartment. Her terrible instant coffee that she refused to apologize for. Her habit of talking through the most complicated cases from her clinic shift while she cooked, using the cooking as a rhythm to think against. He sat in her small kitchen and listened with the same focused attention he brought to everything, and occasionally he said something that surprised her with its precision, cutting to the center of a medical problem with the efficiency of someone trained in high-stakes problem-solving who had simply been using those skills in a completely different field. You think like a strategist, she told him once, meaning it as an observation rather than a compliment. I think like someone who has had to solve problems where the cost of being wrong was very high, he said. Is that what medicine is? She asked. That's what everything I care about is, he said. And then, as if he'd said something more than he'd intended, he looked away. She fell in love with him. She did not decide to. She noticed it one evening while they were washing dishes side by side, an ordinary domestic moment, and he was telling her about his mother, who had died when he was 11, of something routine and treatable that hadn't been treated in time, which was a thing he said without self-pity but with the particular flat effect of an old wound that had been examined so many times it had become just a fact, and she thought, with the clarity of something already true rather than something beginning. I love this man. Completely. Already. The recognition arrived like a diagnosis. Something she hadn't suspected until the evidence was too clear to miss. She sat with it the way she sat with difficult things, and she thought, this is complicated. This is more complicated than anything I have ever chosen to walk toward. And she walked toward it anyway because she was Amara Osei, and she did not back away from things simply because they were difficult. They were careful. They were not careful enough. In the 4th month, she came home from her clinic shift on a Thursday evening and found her apartment door ajar and 2 men inside, not robbing her. She registered this immediately because nothing had been touched. They were standing in her kitchen like furniture that had rearranged itself while she was gone, and one of them held up her photo ID, her clinic lanyard ID which she had left at home that day for the first time, and said something in Korean that translated roughly to, "We know who comes to visit you." She was not hurt. The deliberateness of that, being threatened without being touched, was its own message. We could, at any time we choose. The restraint was the warning. She called him from the CU on the corner, which she'd walked to without running, because she'd understood that running would only tell them something they didn't need to know. He answered before the second ring, the way he always did with her number. She told him what had happened, calmly and specifically, using the same clinical voice she used for complicated cases. On his end, there was a silence of exactly 4 seconds. She counted without meaning to, and in those 4 seconds she could almost hear him recalculate everything. Don't go back inside, he said. Stay at the CU. I will be there. He was there in 12 minutes, which meant he had moved immediately and fast. He came with fewer people than usual, which meant he had prioritized speed over show, which meant he was more alarmed than he was willing to say. He looked at her standing in the orange light of the convenience store with the particular expression of a man who has just encountered the one consequence he hadn't fully allowed himself to plan for. I'm moving you tonight, he said. Somewhere completely clean. 3 weeks, maybe 4, and then this is resolved and you come back. She looked at him. She looked at him for a long moment. This man she had walked toward knowing it was complicated. And she said, and if it takes longer than 4 weeks? He said, it won't. And it was the only time he ever told her something that turned out to be completely irreparably wrong. She didn't find out she was pregnant until she was already in Busan, in the borrowed apartment with the borrowed name, 3 weeks after she had left Seoul with a bag she had packed in 15 minutes and her heart somewhere she couldn't quite locate. She bought the test at a pharmacy she walked to in the rain because she didn't have an umbrella and had decided she didn't care, stood in the bathroom of the borrowed apartment on the cold tile floor, and looked at the result for a very long time. She thought about calling him. She nearly did 3 times in the first hour. She picked up the phone and put it down and picked it up and stood there. And then she thought, with the terrible clarity of a person who is very good at thinking and who cannot stop doing it even when she wishes she could, if anyone learns this child exists, the child becomes leverage, becomes a target, becomes the most effective possible threat against a man for whom threats have always been abstract. She thought about the 2 men standing in her kitchen like furniture. She thought about what that kind of deliberate, precise message implied about what the people who sent it were willing to do. She thought about what Junho himself had told her, in one of those late-night kitchen conversations, about what it meant to be the thing other dangerous people aimed at. She thought, a child does not choose to be born into that aim. She thought about all of this for a long time. She sat on the bathroom floor and thought about it until she was past the point where thinking changed anything. Then she bought a flight to Chicago. She called her mother. She said, I'm coming home. Nothing else. Her mother, who had the specific wisdom of a woman who has loved stubborn people long enough to know when not to push, said only, I'll make up your room. Amara Osei left Korea the same way she had arrived, with suitcases and determination and the bone-deep conviction that she could do what needed to be done. The difference was that this time she was leaving something behind that she had not left willingly. And she walked through Gimhae Airport with her chin up and her face completely still and her heart quietly, neatly, thoroughly breaking beneath all of it. Kofi James Osei was born 7 months later in Atlanta on a Tuesday morning in early spring, in the same hospital where his grandmother worked as a senior nurse practitioner and where his grandfather visited every day during the 3-day stay because he was constitutionally incapable of staying home when the people he loved were in a hospital bed. He weighed 7 pounds exactly and came into the world with his eyes open, already looking around at things with an intensity that made the delivering nurse laugh and say, oh, this one's going to have opinions. He had his father's eyes. Amara knew it in the first minute. She knew it and she held him and she thought, "You will never be afraid of anything if I can help it. You will be safe and you will know you are loved, and you will grow up knowing that you can walk into any room and ask any question, and that will be the thing I give you instead of the father you deserve to have." She kept the photograph because she could not make herself throw it away. One photo, taken on the rooftop in Yongsan at dusk on the evening she hadn't told him she was going to take his picture. He was looking out at the city. In it, he was simply a man watching a skyline, and in the particular quality of his stillness in that captured moment, he looked like someone who wanted something he hadn't yet let himself name. She put it in the back of a drawer. She told herself it was for Kofi, for someday, for the inevitable question she was only postponing. She told herself a lot of things, with the careful rationality of a person who has already made their decision and needs the rationality to be also true. The years moved. They moved the way years with small children move. Densely, exhaustingly, each day full beyond inventory. The months somehow both endless and gone before you've cataloged them. She finished her medical degree through an accelerated program in Atlanta, fighting for every credit and every hour of sleep and every moment of focused study while her mother watched Kofi and her father told her she was remarkable with the matter-of-fact frequency of a man who simply considered it a true statement. She passed her boards on the first attempt. She became Dr. Amara Osei, which had always been the plan, which she had always been going to do, and which felt, when she walked out of the testing center into the Atlanta afternoon, like a thing she had built with her bare hands while simultaneously keeping a small and extraordinary human being alive and growing. She was proud of this. She was entirely allowed to be proud of this. Kofi grew. He was, from the beginning, a specific kind of child, precise, curious, and completely himself. He wanted explanations for things. He noticed inconsistencies. He remembered what you said last week and would reference it 3 weeks from now in a context that revealed he had been turning it over the whole time. He made friends easily because he was genuinely interested in people, and he studied those friendships with a quiet attention that sometimes made other children feel, without knowing why, that they were being taken seriously in an unfamiliar way. He was kind without softness. He was brave without performing it. He walked through the world with the fundamental confidence of a child who has been told, consistently and credibly, that he belongs in it. He asked about his father. He asked regularly and then more specifically and then with better questions. She redirected him each time with things that were true but not whole. "Your dad and I couldn't be together. It was a complicated situation. You have so many people who love you so much." She could not lie to those eyes. She chose instead the things she could say in complete honesty, which was its own kind of evasion, and she knew it and she did it anyway, and she told herself it was for him. He found the photograph when he was 5, on an afternoon when she had fallen asleep over her research notes, and he had been exploring the apartment with the methodical curiosity that characterized most of his free time. He appeared in the doorway to her study holding the photograph in both hands with the gravity of a child who has found something he understands to be significant. "Is this my dad?" he asked. She looked at him. She looked at the photograph in his hands. She said, "Why do you think so?" "Because you keep it hidden," he said, with the precise and pitiless logic of a 5-year-old. "You don't hide things unless they matter." She looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said quietly. "That's your father." He studied the photograph carefully, with the focused attention he gave to things he intended to understand. She watched him do it and felt something enormous and complicated move through her chest. "He looks serious," Kofi said finally. "He is," she said. "But he's—" She stopped herself. She had been about to say something real, something about who Jun-ho actually was beneath all of it, and she closed it. "It's complicated, baby." He handed the photograph back to her and went back to playing without apparent distress. But after that the questions came more often, and they were better questions, and she understood that the reckoning she had been postponing was patient in the way of tides. It was building toward her regardless of what she chose. The job offer came when Kofi was 6. A research position in Seoul, attached to a medical consortium she had been following for 2 years, the kind of opportunity that appears once in a career and does not circle back. She sat with it for 3 weeks. She made the case to herself, systematically, that 7 years was sufficient distance. That Seoul was 12 million people. That the world had moved on from whatever she had been to that world. That her son deserved to see the city where he had been, in the most essential sense, begun. She told herself all of these things with the careful thoroughness of a scientist building an argument. She did not acknowledge the part of herself that simply wanted to go back. Not to him, not exactly, but to the place where she had been, briefly, the fullest version of herself she had ever managed. She accepted the offer. She did not know, could not have known, because she had spent 7 years maintaining a strict discipline about not searching for information that would pull her back toward what she'd left. That Kong Industries was hosting a major business summit at the Grand Hyatt Seoul the same weekend as the medical consortium event. She did not know this because she had never allowed herself to know anything current about him. Every time the impulse arose to type his name into a search bar, she closed the tab. She had done this enough times that she'd stopped counting. So she walked into the Grand Hyatt Seoul with Kofi's hand in hers and her conference badge hanging from its lanyard. and she was looking down at the event itinerary, and she looked up and the ground moved. Is he mine? The question settled in the air of the bland beige meeting room like something physical. Amara stood across the table from Kang Junho, the conference room that a hotel manager had quietly, efficiently provided once it became clear that whatever was happening in the lobby required a door, and she felt, for the first time in 7 years, the full weight of the choice she had made. Through the glass panel in the door, she could see Kofi sitting in the blue chair she had asked him to wait in. He was watching people pass through the lobby with his characteristic particular attention, his feet swinging slightly because the chair was sized for adults. He looked exactly like what he was. A healthy, confident, curious, completely unaffected child who had walked across a hotel lobby and asked a dangerous man a question, and whom no one had ever given sufficient reason to be afraid. She had done that. She had given him that. Yes, she said. Her voice was steady. He is. Junho's face didn't change. Not visibly, not in any way that a stranger would have catalogued. But she had learned, once, how to read beneath the surface of that face, and what she saw there was something she hadn't fully prepared herself for. It wasn't the anger she had expected, or the cold authority, or even the accusation she would have understood and could have defended against. It was something more exposed than any of those things. Something she had only seen in him a handful of times in 3 months. In unguarded seconds he hadn't noticed she was watching. He looked devastated. Tell me, he said, just that. Tell me. And she did. She told him all of it. The discovery in the borrowed apartment, the calculation she had made, the specific fears that had driven it. She told him about the 2 men in her kitchen and what they had represented and what it had made her understand about the arithmetic of loving someone whose existence made everyone around him a potential target. She told him that she had asked herself, every single day for 7 years, whether she had made the right choice, and that the honest answer was that she still didn't know. He was silent for a very long time when she finished. He looked at the table. He looked at the window. He looked at the closed door beyond which his son was sitting in a blue chair with his feet swinging. I searched for 8 months, he said finally. After I resolved the situation and went to bring you back and you were already gone. She closed her eyes for a moment, opened them. I'm sorry, she said. Are you? He asked, not with anger, with genuine inquiry. Yes, she said, not for the decision I made. I can't be sorry for that because I made it for him, but for what it cost you, yes. Genuinely. Another long silence. Is he happy? Junho asked. That question. Of all the things she had prepared for, that question asked first before anything else. She felt something in her chest shift. He is the happiest person I know, she said. He is brilliant and brave and relentlessly curious, and he has never once in 6 years met a stranger he couldn't talk to. He is. Her voice threatened to break and she pressed through it cleanly. He is wonderful. I made sure of that. I had control over that and I used it. Kang Junho looked away from her. He stood facing the window for a moment that stretched, his hands still at his sides, the controlled man very controlled in the particular way of someone controlling something large. She gave him that. She owed him that much at least. When he turned back, his face was level. His eyes were not. I want to meet him, he said. Properly. Yes, she said. I want to know him. The words came out with a careful deliberateness that told her they had cost him something to say plainly. This man who had spent 30 years ensuring that nothing he needed was made visible. I have missed 7 years. I am not prepared to miss more. I know, she said. I'm not asking you to. They walked back out together. Kofi was in the blue chair where she had left him, legs swinging, surveying the lobby traffic with his specific and particular attention. He spotted them immediately. She had never been able to sneak up on this child, not once in 6 years, and slid out of the chair and came to meet them at his usual pace. Not running, which would have been childish, and not slow, which would have been theatrical, but the efficient walk of a person who knows where they are going. He stood between them and looked from one face to the other with an expression that was entirely his own, assembled from pieces of both of them into something new. Are you done talking? He asked. Yes, Amara said. He looked at Kang Junho with the careful, assessing focus he gave to things he was trying to fully understand. He was quiet for a moment that felt significant. Then he asked, in the direct and carrying voice that had started all of this, Are you really my dad? Kang Junho looked down at his son. The man who had made rooms go quiet. The man who had made a senator nod like he was bowing. The man who had spent 30 years building walls and maintaining them through everything life had put against them. He looked at this small person who had walked across a lobby without a moment of hesitation and asked hard questions with complete and unhesitating confidence, who had his jaw and his eyes and apparently also his habit of going directly to the center of things, who had looked up at one of the most feared men in Korea and asked what's your name the way you'd ask any person on any street. Kang Junho smiled. It arrived before he'd decided to allow it. Small, genuine, unperformed, the kind of smile that belongs to a face not particularly accustomed to making it. The kind that, once seen, Makes you understand something about a person that they hadn't told you with words. Yes, he said quietly. I am. Kofi considered this with great seriousness. He gave it the full weight of his attention, the way he gave everything that mattered the full weight of his attention. Then he said, okay, are you hungry? Mom says most problems are easier after food. Kang Junho looked at the boy. He looked at Amara. In his expression was something she hadn't seen there before. Something undefended and open and quietly enormous. The expression of a man in the presence of something he had not prepared himself for and cannot calculate his way around. That sounds like good advice, he said. She has a lot of good advice, Kofi said, already turning toward the hotel restaurant with the confident air of someone who has made a decision on behalf of the group and expects the group to follow. I don't always listen, but it's usually right. Amara laughed. Genuine and sudden and not planned. The laugh that gets away from you before you've decided whether to let it out. And over her son's head, Junho's eyes found hers, and something passed between them that was not forgiveness yet, not resolution yet, but was the unmistakable beginning of a door. They had dinner in the hotel restaurant at a table that a very efficient manager had arranged for 3 in approximately 4 minutes after Junho said a few quiet words to someone. Kofi ate with the focused enthusiasm of a child who takes food seriously, and between bites he asked questions. How tall is this building? What does your company make? Do you know how to cook? What's your favorite animal? Why do you wear all black? Have you ever been to America? What is your favorite thing about Korea? Do you know any card tricks? He asked 17 questions in 40 minutes, accepted most of the answers, contested 3 of them, and at one point corrected a minor factual error in something Junho said about marine biology with the polite certainty of a child who has spent a significant amount of time reading about marine biology. Junho answered every question, directly, specifically, without condescension. He was, Amara realized, slightly astonished. Not by the questions themselves, but by the person asking them. She watched him try not to show it and mostly succeed, and she watched the moments when he didn't quite succeed, and she thought, you are in so much trouble. We both are. And she didn't mean that as a bad thing. Later, when the table was cleared and Kofi had negotiated successfully for dessert on the grounds that it was technically still dinner time if you counted generously, Junho leaned slightly toward Amara and said, quietly enough that it didn't carry, I'm going to protect you both. I want you to know that. Whatever it takes, and for as long as it takes. She looked at him across her son's head. That's not the same as things being simple. I know, he said. I'm not offering simple. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. She held that. She had been doing everything herself for 7 years, not because she wanted to, but because that had been the only structure available. And here now was a different structure. Not easy. Not without its own complications and weight, but present and chosen and clearly meant. We take it slowly, she said. Yes, he agreed. Kofi's pace, not ours. He nodded. He looked at the boy, who was engaged in a very detailed analysis of his dessert. That seems right, he said. He seems to have a better sense of pace than either of us. He started this whole thing, she said. He did, Junho said, and there it was again. That small, unguarded smile, the one that arrived before permission. He walked across an entire lobby. He has good instincts, Kofi said, without looking up from his dessert, making it clear he had been listening to the entire conversation. I knew something important was happening. Amara looked at her son, then at his father, then at the improbable, complicated, not simple thing that a 6-year-old and a hidden photograph and 40 feet of marble lobby had begun building in the middle of an ordinary afternoon in Seoul. He always does, she said. They walked out of the Grand Hyatt 3 hours after Kofi Osei had walked into it and changed everything. The evening had gone blue and cool, the city alive with the particular Saturday energy of Seoul at dusk. Junho's security detail had reconfigured without him saying anything, leaving space around the 3 of them without advertising itself. Kofi walked between them for approximately 30 seconds before he took stock of the situation and made a practical decision. He reached up and took Junho's hand matter-of-factly, the way he took most things, on his own initiative for his own reasons because it seemed like the correct and obvious thing to do. Junho looked down at the small hand in his. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Kang Junho, the man who moved through rooms and had them rearrange themselves, the man who was feared by men who were feared by other men, the man who had spent 30 years ensuring that nothing could reach him, walked out into the Seoul evening holding his son's hand, and thought, with the peculiar clarity of someone encountering the genuinely unprecedented, that he had faced rivals and betrayals and violence and the constant necessary weight of existing as a thing that frightened people. He had navigated all of it. He had been prepared, by 30 years of practice, for most of what the world had sent at him. Nothing had prepared him for this. Nothing had come anywhere close to this. Can we get ice cream? Kofi asked. Yes, Junho said. Mom has a rule about before dinner. It's already after dinner, Amara said. We had dinner. That means it's an acceptable time for ice cream, Kofi said, with the satisfied air of a logician who has just closed an argument. He's going to be dangerous when he's older, Junho said quietly to Amara. He's already dangerous, she said. He's been dangerous since he learned to talk. Kofi tugged once on Junho's hand, pulling him slightly left toward a street that contained, according to Kofi's prior reconnaissance during the summit's coffee break that morning, an ice cream shop he had catalogued for exactly this kind of opportunity. And the feared, careful, finally cracked open man went where his son led him, into the blue soul evening, toward something he hadn't known he was missing until it was standing in a hotel lobby asking him dangerous questions. The most dangerous thing Kang Junho had ever been asked to face, it turned out, was simply this: showing up, every day, as a father. He had no preparation for it. He had every intention of figuring it out. And as they turned the corner into the evening, Kofi's voice already rising with the particular excited energy of a child who has spotted something interesting, Amara walked beside Junho with her hands in her coat pockets and the weight of 7 years still in her chest, but different now. Not removed, not dissolved, but no longer something she was carrying alone. That was the thing she hadn't let herself imagine all those years. Not the drama of reunion, not the resolution, but just this: the possibility of distributing the weight. The possibility that the story she'd been telling herself alone might eventually, slowly, carefully, become something told between more than one person. Kofi got his ice cream. He ate it with grave focus and talked the entire time, one hand gesturing for emphasis, Junho watching him with the expression of a man taking inventory of 7 years through the evidence of a single evening. Once, Kofi said something that made Junho laugh, a real laugh startled out of him, the laugh of someone who forgot for a second that he wasn't the kind of man who laughed easily. And Amara looked at the two of them and felt something move through her that she didn't have the right word for yet. Relief, maybe, or the particular emotion that arrives when something you were afraid would never be okay begins, slowly and imperfectly and with no guarantees, to become okay. It would not be easy. She knew this. There were years to rebuild and truths still to navigate, and a world outside this evening that hadn't become simple just because the evening had. But they were here, and he was here, and her son was eating ice cream with his father for the first time in his life and asking him about the structural integrity of waffle cones. And that was real, and that was a beginning, and beginnings, Amara had learned, were the hardest and most necessary part of everything. If the story moved you, if you felt your breath catch in the lobby, or on that bathroom floor, or at that dinner table when a 6-year-old changed everything by simply asking what was true, share it with someone who needs it today. Drop a comment below and tell me the moment that got you. And if you haven't already, subscribe and like the video. Stories like this one take everything to make, and every subscriber is a reason to keep making them. Thank you for staying until the end. That matters more than you know.